Chapter 19. The Huntsman Variety. Oh, crap. Sky stopped short and looked up. Two heavily armed men sprinted toward her from the woods. Both carried bows, one a crossbow and the other a compound bow. Large knives hung from their belts. If she wasn't mistaken, one also had a handgun. Sky bit her lip as she ran a sweaty hand down the side of her jeans. She quickly scanned the area hoping someone else had come up the road, but it was only the same pavement and trees that surrounded her. She glanced back at the strangers. What have I done? Facing angry men with weapons is not what I want to be doing right now. As he got closer, the dark-haired one yelled at Sky again, "What do you think you're doing? You're just taking other people's stuff now? That how it is? That's my truck." No. I didn't see you. I'm sorry. My car ran out of gas, and it's an emergency. Sky moved backward on shaky feet until she bumped into the side of his vehicle. Didn't think someone might have been out here hunting? Now they were closer, there was no doubt the two men were of the woodsman variety, and their weapons made sense. She swallowed, trying to add moisture to her dry mouth. Not that they still couldn't use them on me if they wanted. Sky held her lips together as she shook her head. Her tart thoughts would not help the situation. No, of course not. Someone hunting is not the first thing that comes to mind when I see an abandoned vehicle. Do I look like the type that would be my first thought? But it seemed they had been on the hunt. The one yelling at Sky held a string of squirrels along with 2 rabbits off one of his powerful shoulders. Her eyes lingered. Powerful enough that a single swing would squash me like a little bug. I just didn't think, she said, her back pushing into the vehicle as goosebumps ran up her arms. She couldn't go any further. Thick, dark, somewhat shaggy hair hung over the man's ears and down the back of his neck. He was taller than her by a few inches, and he used that to his advantage. He stopped close enough to her that she had to look up at him. His chest rose and fell with every ragged breath he exhaled in the small space he left her between himself and his truck. Sky's gaze darted from left to right, looking for a way out. But the man was on alert, and she worried that one move from her would encourage him to truly trap her. She looked down at the ground and bit her lip. Then raised her face to his. This was not a time to back down. He stared at her bold expression, a slight smirk on his face. It was clear he could see the nervousness behind her bravado. The man sneered at her. Yeah, you didn't think, since you were trying to up and take my truck. His sharp, blue eyes gave her a haughty once-over as his breath fanned over her. It don't look like no emergency. He waited, giving her a stare that spoke volumes. Nothing, she said, would be good enough. The man's disdainful expression was Sky's undoing. All the anxiety and worry of the day came spilling out. Fine. Man, fine. I'm sorry. She threw her arms out at him and shouted even as she warned herself to stop. Under normal circumstances, Sky would have booked it out of there well before now, but these weren't normal circumstances. There was nowhere to go. Now how am I going to get to Jessie? You gonna say anything? Darkhair said with a glance to the other man. He stood snickering at the front of the truck. Hey, I'm just watching the show, brother. He was about the same height and build as the man who yelled, but there the similarities ended. His light brown hair was clipped close to his head, and his brown eyes held a harder edge. Sky was at a loss of what to do next. She had no car, and it seemed, no help to get one. Still fuming, Sky pushed at the man in front of her, somewhat surprised he let her. She stepped away from the men, onto the road and circled. Her mind raced, looking for any solution. I don't know what, she said. I just don't know. How far to the nearest anything? When Sky got insolent stares instead of answers, a hot flush rushed from her insides to her face. She sent them furious looks and reached into their truck bed to pull her supplies out. Brown hair rushed over and moved to stop her. "Oh no, those things are ours now, for all the trouble you caused us." Sky huffed. What an idiot. She couldn't stop herself from turning on him. "Trouble? What trouble?" "I got your truck started, which was probably doing you a favor." She ignored that only a moment ago she praised the vehicle's engine. At her insult to the truck, both men instantly scowled. "This is ours now," Brown Hair repeated shortly, leaning his face toward hers. "Seriously? Don't start that idiotic behavior with me," Sky shouted, legs trembling as she held her ground. "Oh man. Talk about throwing all my training out the window. It's mine, it's always been mine, and it will continue to be mine. Uppity for such a little girl, ain't ya?" Brown Hair said, chuckling at her reaction. Sky rolled her eyes. She hadn't been called a little girl since she'd become an adult. "I'm not a little girl. And I'm done with this conversation. I need to leave here. Someone needs me. Anything anyone needs won't matter soon." "Nothing matters no more, you're just wasting time," Dark Hair said. "Don't say that. He's just a little boy." Sky shook her head. "Even if that's true, whatever time he has left shouldn't be the way it's been. It should be." She searched and failed to find the word she wanted before settling on one. "Better." Dark Hair took a half step toward her, his gaze taking and holding hers, his deep voice turning gravelly. "Why? How's it been?" Sky met his hard blue stare and gave him the direct answer he wanted. "Bad, really bad." Immediately, the men stilled. "Jesse hasn't had an appointment in a month. He tries so hard to be tough, but he is just a little boy. I need to get to him." Sky's voice broke. "I need to help him." "How come you waited till now?" "I helped him." "I did. It was better for a while, and now I got word it's not. I've always done whatever I could, anything I could. I had people check on him. I called his school. I crossed lines. But see, now it doesn't matter, there are no more lines." "You're right, now nothing matters." Sky's voice strengthened as she became more determined. "Now I can take him away from that man. No one will stop me." "His dad?" Dark Hair asked, his voice cracking on the words. "Yeah, his dad." The men exchanged a glance, and Dark Hair didn't hesitate. "Get in the truck. We'll get the rest of your stuff." "What?" "No." Darting a wide-eyed gaze from one man to the other, she asked, "I mean, what are you saying?" Dark Hair growled his irritation. "You want to get that boy?" He waved his arm toward the vehicle as he glared at her. "Get in the truck. Now." Sky returned his scowl for a few seconds before she realized his anger was no longer directed at her. She turned and obediently climbed into the vehicle as she threw a glance over her shoulder at him. "Oh boy, please don't let this be a mistake."
Dylan climbed into the truck after the girl. As he started the vehicle, he looked her over again. With care, Sky had settled herself in the exact middle of the seat, then pushed some of her smooth, dark hair behind her ear. She kept her eyes on the floor. The fight gone now, a plan was in place. But Dylan remembered them. Those eyes blazed like green lightning when she was angry. Though her skin was several shades lighter than his, her color was up. Her natural rosy glow deepened, telling him she was still uncomfortable. Dylan tore his gaze from her and cleared his throat. He wasn't sure whether to be in shock or awe she could hotwire his truck. Women like her were a mystery to him. Walking around like their biggest problem was their messed up coffee order. He remembered all the times he'd seen her in town. Course she'd never noticed him. Then here she is trying to take his truck. Dylan rubbed the stubble on his jaw with a calloused hand. He'd treated her bad, he thought, but she'd taken him off guard. Soon as he'd realized who she was, there was something. He didn't know what to do with that. His head was still spinning. Besides, it's better not to get too close to anyone with people dropping like flies. He threw a glance her way and pressed his lips together. Keeping his distance would be hard. Dylan could swear his mouth dropped open when he saw the woman slither, jeans first, from the floor of the truck onto the ground. He'd come to a complete stop when she stood, and he saw it was her. Sky. Sky Jackson. Big shot doctor from Ohio. After Dylan saw her that first day in town, the sun had shone a little brighter, and he'd asked around Colton about her. Her dad was from Colton. He'd married and brought his wife here, even started his family here, but moved to Ohio when his children were young, but she still had cousins in town. The answers varied as to the exact time Sky came to Colton, but Dylan remembered the first time he saw her. And every time after that. Whenever he came to town, he searched for her. He always found Sky. He reckoned he couldn't call himself much of a tracker if he hadn't. Besides, her routine didn't change much. Around 2 o'clock, she got coffee. Down the sidewalk, she would go, dressed in her best clothes. She'd click away on those high heels that purred, little nose just slightly higher in the air than it should be. Something about that challenged him, attracted him. But there was another side to her too, because everyone liked her, every single person he'd talked to about her. So much so, that once they realized his interest, they clammed up. Didn't want a coal boy sniffing around her. They're probably right. Dylan gave Sky one last glance before he turned his attention to his driving. Thinking about the task at hand, old memories of his own upbringing teased at the back of his mind, haunting him. He gripped the hard steering wheel tighter, then shook his head to clear it. He hadn't been able to look at her when she teared up over the boy. If he didn't do anything else for her, he'd help her rescue this kid. For her and for the boy. Dylan looked at Sky sitting there with her hands in her lap, trusting them. That woman would have got nothing but hurt without us. Dylan shot a glance over to his brother. Wade nodded. They agreed, they were gonna save that boy.